Columbia, NASA's first orbiter, is fittingly named after the first American vessel to circumnavigate the globe. However, Columbia quickly becomes a daunting challenge for NASA. Its complex makeup had engineers struggling constantly to reduce Columbia's weight and simplify construction. Especially frustrating was keeping the orbiter's ceramic tiles attached to its fuselage. More than 25,000 of them fit together to protect Columbia from the searing 3,000-degree heat of re-entry.
We were having a lot of problems with the thermal protection system of the tiles. The way we were trying to glue them on, they wouldn't stay on. And we had to come up with a way of making sure that they'd stay on. And we had some really great people that worked that, and that's why it took such a long time. I had hoped it was not going to take that long since John and I were named as a crew, so we had a lot more time to train than what we'd both initially planned.
The requirement was to be able to handle temperatures like 2,500 degrees F that occur on the surface of the TPS, and that's 5 times what your oven is at home that you bake cookies under at max. The other problem is weight, because after all, this is an airplane, so you can't have a metallic system on it that weighs tons. It has to be extremely lightweight. And in fact, the shuttle tiles are about 90% air, and that gives the combination of being able to be temperature resistant and yet at the same time light.
Each orbiter has a unique number of protective tiles. Challenger was built with the most, 31,088, while Atlantis has the fewest, a mere 24,177.
Over in Palmdale, they had put on their first effort of putting the tiles on to protect the aluminum from the heating they were going to get on re-entry. And some of those tiles, when they put them on in the daytime, next morning the tiles were on the hangar floor. And so that was real scary that we could lose some tiles while they were on orbit and really have a problem with the heat coming back on re-entry.
Columbia had a lot of tiles missing yet, needed quite a bit of work before we could deliver it to the Cape, and we scrounged throughout the city of Lancaster for RTV, which was the material we used to glue the tiles on with.
More glue did keep the tiles in place. However, water was literally ripping them apart.
It turns out, in the instant we hit rain, the tiles almost exploded.
The tiles fabrication process was modified and the problem overcome. Other shuttle design features proved less problematic and more groundbreaking. A computerized digital flight control system, now common in commercial and military aircraft, was developed for the orbiter.
In flying the space shuttle, you were so aware that you weren't necessarily talking to the shuttle, you were talking to a computer who in turn was going to talk to the shuttle.
Barriers of race and gender were falling everywhere, and America's corps of shuttle astronauts would become more reflective of the nation it served.
There's been a lot that the shuttle era has done to bring space flight into the domain of the average person. We know it's not just crew-cut white test pilots anymore. It's essentially the United Nations that flies on the space shuttles. It's people of every description that look very much like the rest of us.
The astronaut selection process reflected a changing nation and a changing NASA.
At the time, all the astronauts were military test pilots and there were no females, so it was kind of like one of those dreams that you hope will happen someday, but you didn't really think would.
The NASA astronaut class of 1978, the largest in the agency's history, came from all walks of American life: physicists, meteorologists, fighter pilots, scientists, and for the first time, women and African Americans.
When I came into the astronaut program in '78, there were 3 African Americans that came in at the same time, and it was the first time that NASA had hired African Americans. We had Fred Gregory, who was a test pilot, and then Ron McNair, who was a mission specialist, and I came in as a mission specialist. So all 3 of us were excited about flying in space, and we all 3 of us recognized that we were really going to open up the envelope for other African Americans to fly in space.
While the new class of NASA astronauts trained for subsequent shuttle flights, Columbia was undergoing preparations for the program's maiden voyage, STS-1. Veteran astronaut John Young, one of the 12 men to set foot on the moon, is in command. His pilot is first-time flyer Bob Crippen.
To be sitting on board up there with my buddy John Young and get to experience the whole thing from ascent and being on orbit to flying re-entry, it was one of the high points of my career.
Together they would travel over 1 million miles and circle the Earth 36 times.
The launch finally occurred. We'd been waiting and postponing, and when it finally lifted off and we knew it was going and achieved orbit, we were all in anxious anticipation for what was going to happen next.
Launched like a rocket 2 days earlier, Columbia lands as a glider on the dry lake bed of Edwards Air Force Base in California.
Watching out the window, watching the sea and the clouds rush by, it actually gave a sense of speed, more so than when we were up in orbit, being much higher. I think they were all very relieved because there had been some concern because we had lost some tiles initially on the orbit, and they didn't know whether we'd lost any on the bottom or not. Flew down over the San Joaquin Valley. We do a big turnaround to land on the lake bed for that first flight. And I remember when John went into a bank, a big left bank, I looked down at the lake bed, and there's thousands of people out there. And John, look at all those folks, which had come out to see us land.
Joe Engle was chased, and hear his voice coming in on final, talking to John Young and Cripp in the airplane that they were right on glide slope, coming in for a landing, and then have that landing, and then have John Young do his Young dance. He was just so elated. It was such a magnificent flying machine to him at that time.
The first time I really saw a real shuttle was Columbia, when it was out on the lake bed after the landing, and I'm walking around it. I couldn't believe they sent that big a mass up in the air.
People really thought this was all impossible. So what we have done and shown and demonstrated through the shuttle program is we've shown that we can take the impossible and make it possible.
Thousands of spectators line up along the landing strip to greet the shuttle and its two-man crew.
Anyone who was associated with the program or there just to see the shuttle return, I think felt a lot of pride in our country and our space program. And so those emotions were, finally released, and you said, wow, the flight was done safely, they're back home. The shuttle really does work. It's a great program. It's got a great future ahead of it.
Hey, this thing works, and we got it back all in one piece, which is what we wanted to do.
While Columbia's return was spectacular, it would renew NASA engineers' worries about the shuttle's thermal protection system. During the post-landing inspection, 148 of the orbiter's tiles were found shattered, and 16 more were missing due to the effects of an overpressure wave. While that and other issues were addressed, the 50-ton Columbia would be placed atop the specially configured 747 and ferried back to Florida and processing for its next mission.
It's a massive enterprise. It's over 8 stories tall, sitting on the ground, and you never get over that site. It's really awesome.
After the shuttle lands, there's a processing procedure for the shuttle. Post-flighting it, checking the tires, checking the struts, measure it, get the correct measurements. And then when the shuttle is ready to mate with the 747, we would tow underneath, and then they would lower the space shuttle down on the supports on top of the aircraft. We would take off.
On takeoffs from the extra-long runways of Edwards Air Force Base, the shuttle carrier aircraft's crew of 4 would soon grow accustomed to the smell of burning rubber. That's the intense heat generated by their plane's spinning tires as they carried 2 massive aircraft at more than 100 miles an hour. The average range of a 747 is about 5,000 miles, but due to its weight, configuration, and special flight requirements, the SCA can travel only 1,000 miles at a time. A full turn in the jet can take several zip codes.
32.5. Switching up, thank you.
Cruising at more than 250 miles per hour, the jumbo jet burns 40,000 pounds of fuel per hour. That's 130 pounds per mile, or the length of a football field per gallon. No wonder it has to make several stops before reaching Florida's east coast.
We would get a spacecraft back, go over it again, be sure that we could reuse it, repair it where we had to do. It had never been done before. And so I think that's one of the marvelous things about the space shuttle was we found a way to turn this spacecraft around and use it again.
Before the end of 1982, Columbia would fly 4 more missions.
Liftoff of America's space shuttle,
including STS-5, the first with a crew of more than 2 astronauts. Challenger, the second orbiter in the shuttle fleet, made her maiden flight on April 4th, 1983.
And liftoff of the orbiter Challenger and the 6th flight of the space shuttle.
STS-6 deployed a communications satellite and featured the first spacewalk of the shuttle era. Just 2 months later, Shuttle Challenger was back in orbit, this time with the first American woman in space. Physicist Dr. Sally Ride was a member of Commander Bob Crippen's STS-7 crew that deployed Canadian and Indonesian satellites during the 6-day mission. Challenger was ready for flight in less than 2 months, another NASA first. Shuttling the first African American to space, and Air Force combat pilot Guy Bluford.
For me, it was an exciting moment because it was something that I had been training for 15 to 16 months, and so I was looking forward to the experience of flying in space.
We are in an era of brotherhood.
We have liftoff of mission 41D, the first flight of the orbiter Discovery.
From 1984 to 86, the newest orbiter Discovery would fly a record 6 missions.
And liftoff of mission 51D and the 7-member crew of Discovery.
Carrying into space satellites, international astronauts, even a U.S. senator and a congressman. 1 year after Discovery's debut, Atlantis flew her first mission.
Liftoff of Atlantis. A new orbiter joins the shuttle fleet and it has cleared the tower.
STS-51J. It was also one of 7 classified missions the space shuttle would fly for the Department of Defense. By the end of 1985, the space shuttle program had completed 23 missions, including 9 that year alone. Each successful flight had the unintended consequence of convincing some that spaceflight, once considered among humankind's most inherently dangerous endeavors, had become routine. That notion would soon be tragically dispelled.
Well, I am so excited to be here.
Amid much fanfare, Krista McAuliffe, an elementary school instructor from Concord, New Hampshire, had been chosen from among 11,000 applicants to be NASA's first teacher in space.
I would like to humanize the space age by giving a perspective from a non-astronaut, because I think the students will look at that and say, this is an ordinary person. This ordinary person is contributing to history, and if they can make that connection, then they're going to get excited about history, they're going to get excited about the future, they're going to get excited about space.
The American public's interest in its space program was renewed by her participation and was eager to see her off. Commanding the flight was Dick Scobie. His pilot was Michael Smith. Serving as Challenger's mission specialists are Judy Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, and Ron McNair. Joining McAuliffe as a payload specialist was Greg Jarvis. From the start, STS-51L was plagued by delays, mostly due to unseasonably cold temperatures in Florida. Rather than give pause for thought, the delays only tried the nation's patience. Everyone, it seemed, was itching to go. January 28th, the ground temperature at Launch Pad 39B was a frigid 36 degrees. Ice could be seen on the launch vehicle. Despite concerns voiced by some, shuttle managers reluctantly decided to press ahead for a late morning liftoff.
6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Challenger, go with throttle up. Challenger, go with throttle up.
At 11:39 Eastern, at twice the speed of sound, the Challenger's fuselage breaks apart from the inside out. America's space program suffers its first fatalities in flight.
God, no.
All 7 Challenger crew members perish.
Okay, everybody, stay off the telephones. Make sure you maintain all your data. Start pulling it together.
We come together today to mourn the loss of 7 brave Americans, to share the grief that we all feel, and perhaps in that sharing to find the strength to bear our sorrow and the courage to look for the seeds of hope.
The investigation, headed by former Secretary of State William Rogers, would fault a solid rocket booster O-ring, rendered defective by the bitter cold. But the Commission's findings also addressed the human factor, the role played by shuttle program managers in sending Challenger aloft that day. The shuttle program came to a halt. It took more than 2.5 years of arduous engineering analysis and painful soul searching before a retooled and reborn shuttle would return to flight.
Challenger was tough because it not only represented a breakdown in communications, but it represented everything that's wrong or wrong about an agency like we are, where segments of the agency weren't talking to each other and didn't know everything that we should know.
We thought we knew where all the risks were and had them pretty well contained. The solid rocket boosters that caused the accident, obviously there was something that had slipped through. So we went back throughout the complete vehicle, all the systems, and did a complete review and trying to find any other things that we may have missed that may be lurking there.
When things are really starting to look smooth and you're starting to get maybe overconfident in a way, then it's time for you to step back, think about what you're doing, go back and look, do some additional testing, and see if there's something that you really hadn't anticipated that is going on with your systems.
During a lot of that time, we got a lot of criticism that maybe the agency had lost its edge. There were folks inside the agency that started losing their confidence, thinking maybe we can't do this anymore. 2.5 years later, when we flew and then landed that flight, it showed that no, we really can overcome really, really large problems, really tough technical problems today, just like we could 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or 50 years ago. That was an important milestone.
And liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
On September 29, 1988, 975 days after the loss of Challenger and her crew, the orbiter Discovery returned 6 veteran astronauts to space to deploy a tracking and data relay satellite important to a number of NASA missions. STS-26 proved a comeback milestone for the space shuttle and initiated a tradition that survives with the program today.
During the flight, we had roses show up in the Mission Control Center. 6 roses, 5 red, 1 white. And there was a card attached to it, and it simply said, "Congratulations, return to flight, we wish you well." And it was signed Mark, Terry, and Mackenzie Shelton. Didn't know who they were, but after the flight, we through the Foro company, we tracked them down so we could send them some pictures and something to thank them for sending the roses to Mission Control. So the next flight, roses show up again. And again, it's 5 roses for the members of the crew and 1 rose for those who have lost their lives in this endeavor. And so this family, they have become part of our family, and they haven't missed a flight since. Every flight since that time and to date, and I suspect they're going to go right with us to the end of the shuttle program.
STS-26 ended on October 3, 1988, at Edwards Air Force Base, California.
Standing by for nose gear and touchdown.
With Discovery's safe landing on runway 17, the triumphant crew was greeted warmly by Vice President George Bush on behalf of a proud and grateful nation.
There's something special about a return to flight that makes you You have some trepidation because it's still fresh in your mind that you're frail and you can make mistakes and you're human.